and as luck would have it, they weren't the only ones thinking of Top Gear's future. As after the show was cancelled, the two ex-Top Gear presenters, Jeremy Clarkson and Andy Willman, met in a pub and discussed a new Top Gear. When they met up, Clarkson was already buzzing with ideas, and between them they set out the foundations for one of the best shows in the world. Thought I'll get it in early, it's got to be said. Now, Jeremy came to the pub with a lot of the structure and key components for the show already figured out, as Andy Willman just added bits and bobs.
I've got my skills, but where he's good, he's the one with the light bulb moments. Mm-hmm. He's the one who goes, tell you what, let's smash that wall down and see what's on the other side of it. And then I'll go, all right, I'll find a good way of smashing that wall down, or whatever.
The new show would be anchored in one location, so the presenters could converse with each other, and they'd also have a studio audience that they could play off. Also, having a studio meant the presenters could do a news section, so they could talk about cars without necessarily having to test drive all of them.
All the logic was pragmatic. He was like, if we have a news section, if you look at Top Gear at the minute, the old Top Gear, you have to, if you're going to mention the new Volkswagen Golf, because it's an important car, you have to do a 6-minute film on it in the current sort of format of Top Gear, the old one. And he goes, but it's not worth a film because the car is just very good. It costs this much, and if you want one, buy one. It doesn't make good TV, and this is what he'd worked out.
Sure.
So he's like, so if we have a news section, we can just cover off cars that aren't worth filming, and then we'll just film interesting cars.
It also gave them an excuse to sit down as well. Smart thinking, geezers, smart thinking. In addition to a studio, they also wanted a test track, so the cars could let loose instead of being restricted to the speed limits of public roads, like in the old Top Gear. Inspired by the love of lists in the book High Fidelity, the new Top Gear would have a leaderboard where they could see what would be the fastest car to go round their test track. They also wanted to do a chat show feature where the celebrities would be interviewed and then have a go around the Top Gear test track, with their names being put on a leaderboard so we could see who the fastest celebrity was. Already a bit smashed by this point, one of them had the thought of Brian Ferry in a black tie racing around the track in an unfashionable car, like a Hyundai. And after they finished laughing at that mental image, the idea emerged to call the segment The Star in the Reasonably Priced Car. Because, it rhymes.
And he's like, they've got to do a lap time. And I was like, I say the more cautious one. I'm going, but what if they don't want to do a lap time? He goes, well, they don't come on. And I'm like, okay, right. So, Jonathan Ross, who was probably like the biggest TV star at the time, I was going to say, if he doesn't want to do a lap time, he goes, well, he doesn't come on. Yeah. And I'm like, you're mental. It's never going to work.
Now, they needed a name for the new show. Carmageddon was one of the ones that was considered, but they instead settled on using Top Gear, as it had the name recognition and it saves them making new signs and all of that, save a bit of ink in the printer. Keeping with the brand recognition, they again decided to use the same theme as before, Jessica by the Allman Brothers. However, this time, a new version would be commissioned. This wasn't the first time that they'd actually changed a theme. In 1998, they started using a faster version composed by Hanson Bass. However, this time they got one to be composed by Christian Henson.
I took 3 loops, all made by this guy called BT. Some really cheesy orchestral stabs, a synth bass, and I got a friend to come over to play one of these and to plug it into this thing to make a theme for a pokey little motoring show on BBC Two.
This version would find the sweet spot of being faster and more upbeat than the original Allman Brothers version, but not as fast or as processed as the Hanson bass version. So now to pitch the idea to the BBC. Well, I mean, they first probably had to finish their pints, go home, have a sleep, have a shower, and then to pitch the idea to the BBC. Back on the 8th of August 2001, when the BBC announced the cancellation of Top Gear, that same day they already announced 2 new motoring programmes to take the place of Top Gear. They would be Top Gear Carjack and Panic Mechanics. In case you're thinking, I don't remember a show called Top Gear Carjack, it actually had to change its name to Wrong Car, Right Car after the carjack murder of estate agent Timothy Robinson in January of 2002. In case you're wondering why you haven't heard of Panic Mechanics, it's probably because it was a bit shit and was cancelled after 1 series. I mean, it did attract 3 million viewers a week, but it wasn't enough for it to get renewed. Wrong Car Right Car was a bit more successful, it ran for 2 series, but yeah, it didn't really set the world alight. So all of this is to say, the BBC had space for a motoring programme, and the Top Gear IP was available. Andy Willman and Jeremy Clarkson pitched the idea for the new Top Gear to BBC Two controller Jane Root. Jane was the first female controller of a BBC channel. She'd also worked in TV for multiple decades, wrote a book about TV, and she co-founded and was joint managing director of the production company Wall to Wall. She would be a controller at BBC Two for several years and had a great eye for what would make good TV shows. Some of the shows she'd commissioned would be The Weakest Link and The Office. So yeah, she knew her stuff. She was a very well respected person in the TV industry. So Jeremy and Andy went in and delivered a rambling stream of consciousness pitch, and Jane, she told them, yeah, just go and get on with making the show. And so they said, alright, nice one, yeah, and they got on with it. She also seems like a nice geezer, this Jane, you know, if you're watching this and you're hiring, let me know.
All we wanted to do in 2002 was make Top Gear a more watchable show and bring it up to date from the old Top Gear. Jane Root, who ran BBC Two, she's like, that's all I want. You know, you've now modernised it.
Now the new Top Gear needed a presenting team. Jeremy would be the main presenter and very much the star of the show, while Andy Willman would be behind the camera producing.
I said many times, you could have lost any of the 3 of us on screen. Obviously, Jeremy would have been a catastrophic loss because that's the big gorilla in the centre of it. But we could have made something as long as we had Willman. If we lost Willman, nah.
Jason Barlow, the last remaining Top Gear presenter who hadn't jumped ship to join Channel 5, still had a contract with the BBC until 2003. So he was considered to resume his role as host on the show. However, Clarkson felt like him and Jason wouldn't gel, so the BBC instead made him one of the hosts of the aforementioned Wrong Car Right Car. Instead of using a large presenting team like the old Top Gear, now they just have 3 presenters, which would prove to be a smart move, as a smaller team meant that each of them had adequate time to establish their character and really get well acquainted with the audience. So Clarkson and Willman had the task of casting the other 2 presenters. They held auditions in a studio in Acton with a Renault Aventine. For the audition, potential presenters would have to talk about the Renault and then do some news items with Jeremy. And early in the auditioning process, coming through the doors was another door, Jason Dorr. He was a car dealer in his mid-30s who delivered a very witty and entertaining audition. Another guy to audition that day was James May. He took the opposite approach to Jason Dorr. He said the Renault was marketing bollocks, discarded the news topics, and instead talked about how expensive it was to run his Rolls Royce and how it financially ruined him. Another method of screening potential presenters was by watching VHS tapes that were sent in to them. Producer Kate Shears sifted through the tapes. Some were good, some were bad, some were strange, like a man who dressed up as Batman. However, there was one that stood out, and Kate Shears came into the office with a tape that she said was worth a look. On that tape was a man talking about his company car, a Renault Laguna, and that man was Richard Hammond. He was invited to come in for an audition, and he did alright, but nothing special.
And then Hammond came in, and then I didn't see him for quite some time because obviously he's so low down.
It was after he finished the audition that his talent would shine through, as he recounted his unsuccessful career as a radio DJ, where he said his highlight was being on Radio Cumbria and reading out the names of lambs that were up for adoption. He cracked everyone up with his self-deprecating humour. And just before he left, he said to Jeremy Clarkson,
and then after it was all over, we'd done the screen test, and I said, "Oh, whereabouts are you from?" And he went, "I'm from the Narm." Oh, Christ. And he went, "Yeah, Cheltenham." I was like, "Okay, you've got the job." I just knew immediately.
And that's what got me the job, apparently. Not my sparkling personality, wit, experience, knowledge, skill, tradecraft. None of that. Just that one little joke.
The thing people don't realise about Hammond is just how funny he is. It's just annoying when you turn the television cameras on, he's not funny at all, but as soon as you turn them off, he's hilarious. One of the funniest people I've ever met.
They still needed one more presenter. Clarkson wanted James May, Willman wanted Jason Dorr. However, the BBC had a different idea altogether, as they wanted a female presenter to appeal to a female audience. You don't want the show being too much fun, do you? Andy and Jeremy auditioned several women. One of them apparently was Susie Perry, who actually turned down the offer to be a presenter on the show, which may or may not be true. Andy and Jeremy ultimately opted for an all-male team so they could maintain the bloke-type banter that an all-male team could provide. Over the years to come, the lack of female representation on the show would be one of Top Gear's many criticisms, as many branded the show sexist. Jeremy and Andy went to Jane Root and they told her that they wanted to go with an all-male team, and to their surprise, she just said, "Yeah, fine geezers, yeah," and let them get on with it. Again, seems like a nice geezer, this Jane. Anyway, having Jane Root as BBC Two controller would prove to be a godsend for the show, as she would give the Top Gear team the freedom to mess up and keep going, and she would push them when they were being a bit timid with their ideas. She would actually defend their mad ideas. She would also say Top Gear shouldn't cover other people's events, but instead put on their own and create their own world. And that in time would prove to be one of the key components to making this show a success. So going back to the search for a third host, after some debate they settled on Jason Dorr. So now with the presenters sorted, there was one more key role that needed to be filled. That was the racing driver. Clarkson and Willman needed a driver to set the lap times for the cars that they would bring in. They also needed someone to teach the celebrities who were going to take part in the Star in a reasonably priced car segment.
So you've got Jeremy, Jason Dorr, Hammond. You've got 3 people, and we were still looking for a TIFF, a racing driver who could drive and speak. There's 3 of you have all got to do something, you, Jason, and Richard Hammond, and it's like, so the racing driver, what the fuck does he do? I can't get a scenario, even if we can find one who can speak, which is rare. Where do you put him? What's he do?
Yeah.
And Jeremy's like, oh shit, yeah, I see what you mean. And then he just like sat there, and this is him. He like, hang on, why does he need to speak?
So Clarkson had the idea of a race car driver who we never saw the face of and we never heard speak.
We don't know its name, we really don't know its name, no one knows its name, and we don't want to know because it's a racing driver, and racing drivers have tiny little brains and therefore worthless opinions, and they're very dull. Doctors actually call it Mansell's syndrome.
He was treated like a thing. He would wear a black racing suit, never taking his helmet off, never revealing his identity.
We just keep the driver, anonymous, and then people try and guess who he is, and he never speaks, and he just does the lap time.
His origins would be steeped in mystery, with Jeremy Clarkson continually hinting at aspects of his past in one of the show's longest running jokes.
Some say that he appears on high-value stamps in Sweden and that he can catch fish with his tongue.
Some say he isn't machine washable, and all his potted plants are called Steve.
Some say he's wanted by the CIA and that he sleeps upside down like a bat. Some say that he invented the curtain. Some say that he's recently been releasing pop records under the pseudonym of Lady Gaga. All we know is he's called
The Gimp.
Inspired by Pulp Fiction, this character would be called the Gimp. But who would be the geezer to be the Gimp? Well, Jeremy Clarkson happened to be at the launch of the book Flat Out, Flat Broke, Formula One the Hard Way. This book was the autobiography of the very experienced racing driver Perry McCarthy, not related to the Wolves manager.
And whilst we was at the book launch, Jeremy said to me, "Need to talk to you." So I said, "Yeah." He said, "Look, Top Gear, the BBC TV motoring show, which was big in the UK, had been off air for quite a number of years by the time of my book launch." And he said, "Look, we're going to be bringing this back, and we've got an idea for you."
Also, Perry's head did actually look like a racing helmet, so that was handy. So Perry McCarthy would be the Gimp. And when he learned of the character's name, he said,
I said, "No, you're not." So I said, "Why?" So I said, "Because I've seen Pulp Fiction, So that's really not going to work."
Because he says, "I'm not doing it. I'm not going around being called the Gimp." And we were like, "Ooh, that's a bit close to the bone. Look how much he's protesting."
Also, I think the BBC might have had something to say about one of the characters on their shows being called the Gimp. Parents probably wouldn't be that inclined to buy lunch boxes and t-shirts with a Gimp on it. Well, I suppose it depends who your parents are, but yeah, probably best to change the name.
What do we do? We're recording the pilot. And then Jeremy went, "Stig."
So for the new name, Clarkson and Willman would dip back to their days at Repton, and they would use the name that they would call New Students.
Now you can imagine BBC, when you go, "Oh, it's the name for a new boy at a public school," you can imagine how well that went down. Like, people would go, "Oh, okay," like executives go, "Okay," and then they go, "Fucking twats," like, posh twats. It's like, well, whatever. It is that.
So the new character would be the Stig. Valuable additions to the show behind the camera were a team of researchers, Jim Wiseman and Roland French, who both contributed great ideas to the show. Richard Porter, who used to be a researcher on the old Top Gear before trying out various roles on the show and then leaving to create a satirical motoring website, Sniff Petrol, would return. He would be brought back by Jeremy, who shared the same sense of humour as him. Porter was given the job title of script editor and would prove to be one of the key creative minds behind the new Top Gear. For the VTs, they got in several directors, but the one who really stood out was Nigel Simkis. He was the man behind all the epic arty shots that really made your pubes stand on end. The racetrack that would serve as the arena for this show would be the site of Dunsfield Park in Surrey. The racecourse itself was designed by Lotus. This site would also house their studio. So now they had the format, the presenters, the driver, the studio, the track. All they needed to do was film the pilot. For the pilot, their in-studio guest would be none other than David Ginola, which for a pilot is probably quite an expensive studio guest, but he was worth it. So in August of 2002, or by Andy Willman's account in July of 2002, Hammond, Clarkson and Dorr and a studio audience comprising of a few hundred people packed themselves into the new brightly lit Top Gear studio in a metal hangar in Dunsfold. And they absolutely melted. The studio was so hot that the audience were in a coma-like state, like one of my stand-up shows. Jason Dorr was soaking in sweat, and David Ginola was in a pool of his own sweat. But despite having that last thing going for them, if I was, the pilot still didn't go well. In addition to the heat, there were other problems, like the set, which was very restrictive.
The original pilot of Top Gear had this huge set. It was in the round. It was this metal sort of frame, wasn't it? People could stand sort of on levels.
It was a tremendous waste of public
Like
money.
Thunderdome.
Very, very
Like
good.
Thunderdome.
It was like Thunderdome.
And it had this sort of gate that opened, and cars could come into the stage in the middle.
The presenters were also reading from auto cues, so there wasn't much energy or chemistry. To make things worse, during the recording, Perry McCarthy only went and pissed off, so they had to get someone from Top Gear magazine to play the Stig. And this did not go well. Apparently the person who was playing the Stig was moving like a robot, and yeah, it just didn't go well.
But we never said the Stig's a robot. I mean, at this point, we've just gone, he's a racing driver, we don't want to hear him speak. Here he comes. And in the gallery, I remember Brian, our director, went, "What's he doing?" And we were like, "We don't know. Who told him to do that? Nobody." So he went, "Right, stop, cut. Go back, do it again, but just walk normally." And gate open.
And we can only conclude that he walks like a robot.
To make things even worse, David Ginola thought that he was actually going to be a presenter on the show and that it was going to be a reoccurring role. So that would probably be quite an awkward conversation. The shoot went on for ages as they kept having to do retakes. When they eventually got into the editing room to compile the footage, they took a look at it and it didn't look good. Not at all. However, Jane Root, again proving to be a geezer, told them to relax. She said she expected to see people walking around with cups of coffee and camera cables in shot, and she told them to relax and to go back out there and film another pilot. So with that feedback, they went into the hangar in Dunsfield for another go. This time, they didn't use an auto cue. They demolished the old set, they used less lights, and they subbed off David Ginola. And as it turned out, it would go even worse. This time, the show was too relaxed. The presenters were hard to pick out from the crowd members were blocking shots, they didn't have enough lights to cover all the presenters. When Jason was demonstrating the poor build quality of one of the cars, he actually broke the centre console, and overall, it was such an unprofessional shambles that the director actually stormed off. Needless to say, they had to film the pilot again. By this time, it was August, and they had an air date that was set in stone of October. They had to film the pilot. They had one more go. So for the third time, they went into the hangar in Dunsfield with the knowledge that whatever they filmed would go on air. It was now or never for Top Gear. The future of the show all rested on this third taping. And it turned out to be third time lucky. It was a success. Well, I say a success, they got it done. They had a version that was ready to go out on air. And on the 20th of October 2002, Top Gear was back. It had only been away a few months, but still, Top Gear was back.
Here's Clarkson! The King of Cars is back. The all-new Top Gear, Sunday at 8 on BBC Two.
And it was alright, you know, the show was now double the length of the old Top Gear, running for an hour instead of half an hour, which was a great idea. You know, it really allowed the show to breathe. Also, Richard Hammond took to the role like a former child star to Coke, and the chemistry was immediately there between him and Clarkson. As for Jason Dorr, he was okay. I mean, he was not bad.
3,500 for the UK for the whole year. Now, if you divide that by 220 dealers, it works out about one car per dealer per month.
Which is nowhere near enough.
Which is nowhere near enough.
Not especially good, but, you know, not too bad. He was inexperienced as a TV presenter, and it did show, but he was okay considering. He was okay. I described the segments pretty much in the same way, not bad, but not especially good. Clarkson road-tested the Citroen Berlingo, Richard Hammond tried to beat a speed camera, Jason Dorr gave some good consumer advice. It wasn't anything special. And that's really how the series in general would proceed.
If you watch that first series, it's shit.
Yeah.
Because we were learning, we were completely out of our depth, but we learned. And it was good enough to sort of survive. But the audience was flat dead. We had 50 people.
Yeah.
We thought that was enough. It was fucking chronic.
Early on in the show, they established a clear creative ethos that would serve them well. In order to keep the show in the world of consumer advice, the ideas for the show would always be devised on the basis that they must answer some kind of question.
What if you took a normal heavy car and then took out of it all the spare stuff that you don't need to make it lighter? How much faster could you make it go? Well, we had to find out.
However, to keep the show entertaining, that question might be something that not many people would actually ask, like, what's the fastest religion? Over the years, the show would prove to be more entertaining the more outlandish the question was. Some of the other segments in Series 1 included creating a budget Bond car, jumping a row of motorbikes with a bus, and the introduction of the Cool Wall, all of which was pretty good. However, the show was still finding its feet. They got the tone, the type of humour and the focus on spectacle, that was all there, but they hadn't quite figured out what they were doing with the format and the presentation. For example, when displaying their big spectacles, like jumping a load of bikes with a bus, they just simply previewed it and then later on in the show they showed it. That was it. They hadn't quite figured out how they should build up a segment and present it in the best possible way to extract the most from it. In these early days, they were also giving each episode a theme, which didn't really suit the show.
The theme of the show tonight is the environment.
The first series really wasn't anything special. The presenters even had to pay the studio audiences not to leave during recordings. However, the viewership for the show was actually alright. It averaged 3.30 million over the course of the series, which isn't disastrous, and the BBC were happy with it, as their target was 3 million viewers. So it was a modest success. However, one element of the show not quite working out was Jason Dorr. He was a novice presenter, and it showed. He didn't quite have the charisma of the other two presenters. His limitations were on their fullest display in his solo VTs. Next to Clarkson and Hammond's, Dorr's were just a bit boring. Also, he did make claims about the cars that proved to be heavily refuted, which is an industry term for he was chatting bollocks. To make things worse, his used car news was putting people to sleep. That bit I mentioned earlier about them having to pay audience members to actually stay, yeah, that was during the used car news. So, yeah, it's not good, not good. Over the series, Dorr was phased out more and more, until you forget he was even there. And after the series ended, he wasn't. Jason Dorr was a nice enough chap. Well, apparently, I don't know, I've never met him. He wasn't awful as a presenter, but he wasn't what the show needed, so he was out. However, the talent changes didn't look like they were going to end there, as BBC higher-ups wanted Richard Hammond out. In an attempt to attract a younger, trendier audience, there was a discussion about getting in 2 young, trendy presenters. However, Wilman and Clarkson said, "Oh no, behave yourself, mate, Hammond's staying." But who would be the third presenter?
Now, this being a new series of Top Gear, we thought we'd try out a new presenter.
Up step, Captain Slow, James May.
Okay, he's called James May, and on the evidence of what we're about to see, he is a blithering idiot.
Well, you know, when Jason decided he didn't want to carry on, he went back and he said, right, now we have to try James, because I think that would work. And he was right. And You know, me and Clarkson do wind each other up appallingly, but that's what you need for TV.
So now we finally have the classic team in place. The best trio to never release a disco song. James May took to the role like a chaff to pregnancy, and he fit in straight away. They had struck pay dirt. They got what any team needs but often struggle to find: chemistry. What set these three apart from a lot of other presenting teams is it was completely natural. These three geezers were three distinctive personalities. However, they were all on the same page. They had the same interests, the same sense of humour, and the same goal to make the best show possible. Alone, they each had their own clear and distinct and equally lovable personalities that would endear them to the audience, and when they were put together, they would clash and complement each other so well to tense and hilarious results.
I think people would always find they'd identify with one of the three of us. Am I the little short, squeaky, brummy one, or am I the more graceful, long-haired, slightly fat one, or the really big, fat, shouty one? Which one am I? Which one? And you'd fall into one of those camps. And so that would sort of take you along with us on whatever adventure we were going on. It's why we ended up making today the big trips, because that's what people liked, the proper escape.
We needle each other, and it's almost a form of distrust of the others, or a slight fear that the other person might be doing better than you or being cleverer than you.
It needs a bit of tension, doesn't it?
Definitely.
The chemistry that exists between Richard, James and I has rather taken over. Now, you can't really engineer chemistry. That just happens. We really genuinely loathe each other.
The dynamic that these three had together is at its core why the show would be so loved.
It's a journey into the male mind, which I believe is a really potentially very funny place, because, let's face it, nothing happens there. 3
middle-aged men falling over with an occasional car drifting by in the back of a shot. Oh, was that a car? Yes, that was a car. But that's really all it is.
So now Top Gear had found their missing piece of the puzzle. And on the 11th of May 2003, Series 2 would debut. And it was alright, you know, it was okay. Wasn't special. Again, like Series 1, the ideas were good. The tone of the show, that was there. Testing if the Ford World Rally team could put together a car faster than a group of girls could get ready for a night out, that was pretty funny. They also started to make better use of the live studio audience, which would be an integral part of the show over the years. They pretty much became like a character in their own right.
Hold on a minute.
Vauxhall VX220.
Out. Come on. Out. Go on, out. Right the way out. Right the way over here. The Vauxhall VX220 is a fine car in every way. Out.
However, despite all this good stuff, the show's ratings were down from the last series, averaging 3.16 million viewers. However, above 3 million viewers, still a modest success, and the show was successful overseas, particularly in Holland. And they have the right outlook about most things. It proved to be so successful in the Netherlands that they actually sent a film crew over to do a story on them, and in that story you can actually hear the Stig speak. Which doesn't seem right, Destroy that footage, destroy it. So Top Gear would be renewed for a third series. However, someone who wouldn't return with it would be Perry McCarthy. Right from the start of Top Gear, Andy Willman made it clear to the Top Gear staff that the Stig's identity had to be kept secret, saying that he would sack anyone who leaked his identity. And to be fair to Pez, he did try and keep his identity secret. He went through the Top Gear gates already in his helmet, he was speaking to celebs in a French accent, and he would eat in secret.
But I remember going to Perry and going, so how was it out there, Perry? And he'd be like, well, I didn't know it was Perry. I genuinely didn't know it was Perry at that point. So I'd say, you know, Stiggy, how was it? And he'd go, well, he's a little bit twitchy around the Chicago. And you'd be like, who is this guy? He's plainly not French, but I appreciate that he's really putting his all into the accent.
Yeah.
So,
I forgot about that. He did, yeah.
However, people in the motoring industry still had a feeling that it was Perry. After the first series ended, on the 12th of January, the Sunday Mirror printed an article naming Perry McCarthy as the Stig. Now, Perry did deny these rumours, but he still made the decision to leave the show. Now, according to Perry, one of the reasons for him leaving was because of money.
Commercially, I'd agreed a handshake on a deal, fine, but it was going to remain like that. And there was no way that, let's say, as a TV presenter, I could exploit being on such a successful show as such a successful character, because the nature of it was secrecy.
He was only getting paid £700 an episode. It's not too bad, actually. I'd do that for a shift, £700. Added to this was Perry's desire to become a presenter, which clearly went against the mandate that Willman and Clarkson had for the role of the Stig. So eventually, Perry said fuck it and left the show. 3 months after he left, he published the second edition of his autobiography, in which he revealed that he was the Stig. Now, all of this was according to Perry. This was his timeline, so if it's wrong, feel free to let me know in the comments, but no, I don't have any reason to dispute it.
Yes, because Perry, what happened with Perry wasn't it because he sort of wasn't super discreet about things sometimes. No. I think people in the motor racing world were going, Perry, are you the Stig? And he was like, no.
I should add that Perry also apparently tried to register the Stig as a trademark, so the BBC weren't too pleased about that. So the long and short of it was that Perry was gone as the Stig. Series 3 opened dramatically with the segment that would see the death of the Stig. The character, not Perry McCarthy. The BBC aren't that savage. Anyway, the segment would be called Top Gear vs Top Gun. Great name. In the segment, the Stig would be in the old Top Gear Jag that had previously featured on the show, and he would race a Harrier jump jet on board a Royal Aircraft Carrier HMS Invincible. This is a use of taxpayer funds I think that we can all get behind.
100 miles an hour in 200 metres, and unlike the pilot, the Stig must leave himself enough space to pull up again.
However, when the race occurred, the hollowed out Jag that was injected with nitrogen just kept going, as it plunged its way into the ocean, ending the reign of the first Stig.
And that is unquestionably the end of our Jaguar. But what about the Stig? That is all that was there. The Navy divers went down, but they couldn't find anything.
Again, the character, the first Stig. Perry is alive and well. So now Top Gear had to get a new Stig. The first Stig wore all black, so this Stig would wear all white. And we would get the iconic white racing outfit that would be one of the most recognisable images in the world. The man under the helmet would be Ben Collins, another very experienced racing car driver who'd raced Formula 3, stock car racing, Indy cars, Scale Electrics, Hot Wheels, Need for Speed, all of that. He'd done all the racing bollocks. He would make the character of the Stig his own, bring in all the trademark mannerisms that define the character that would soon become a cultural phenomenon.
It only really worked because you were able to do that sort of, because your successor...
I modelled it on Crocodile Dundee. Yes.
What?
Well, that all makes sense.
Yeah.
When you got the knife
Crocodile
out on
Dundee,
that
when you came to the city, couldn't go down an escalator, all those things.
Oh, I see, yes.
Ah, very good.
Yeah.
So the Stig is dead, long live the Stig. Now, while they could kill the Stig, they couldn't kill the Toyota Hilux. Episode 5 and 6 of Series 3 would see them try and kill the unkillable car. After several attempts to destroy it in Episode 5, the Toyota would soldier through, which would elicit huge cheers from the audience. Episode 6 would see them perch it on top of a tower block, which would soon be destroyed, and see if they could kill the car. However, the car still lived on, and that would elicit even larger cheers from the audience.
I remember watching it at the time thinking, this is not a review show of new cars anymore. This is something completely different.
It's insane, isn't it? What kind of programme does that? Top Gear.
This, along with other budget-breaking segments, saw the series' average viewership rise to 4.03 million. Away from the show, Richard Hammond's individual star would also be on the rise, as he got the job presenting Brainiac. Top Gear would return for a 4th series, and now with a higher budget, and this is where the show would really come into its own. This for me marks the start of the golden age of Top Gear. Episode 1 of the series would see them do their first epic race. This would prove to be one of their most popular reoccurring features. These epic races would usually consist of Clarkson in a car taking on Richard Hammond and James May in an alternative form of transport, in an attempt to see if a method of transport could be faster than the car. This time, Jeremy Clarkson would be in an Aston Martin DB9 against Richard and James, who would take the Eurostar as they raced to Monte Carlo. After filming was completed, Andy Willman and the editors tidied it up in post to make the race appear closer than it was and ramp up the drama, and it went down a fucking treat. In one guise or another, these epic races would be a feature that the show would revisit throughout the years, each time to fantastic results. Well, perhaps maybe not when they did that old-fashioned one, but the rest of them, they were great. Episode 3 would see the introduction of another much-loved staple of the show, the Cheap Car Challenges, which, as you can probably deduce from the title, would consist of challenges that the presenters were set that they had to carry out within a certain budget.
Welcome. Now, a number of people have been saying that there are too many fast and expensive cars on this show, so the production team came up with a plan. They gave each of the presenters £100, and we were told to go off and buy a car. That's a road-legal car for less than £100. Then we were told to meet up at Toddington Services on the M1, where we would be given a number of challenges. This is what happened.
This spend cap would be a great way to force the presenters to be creative. And it was great television. Begin as you mean to go on.
Yes, he's dead, so that's 10 points away there. And if you want a job on Top Gear, please write to Top Gear.
No, wait, look, he's coming round.
He is!
He's
He
alive!
lives! He lives!
That's no 10 points off, though. Blast.
In a contrast to the cheap car challenges, they'd also do 3-person car comparisons, where they drive more expensive cars in nicer locations in attempts to find out which one of them was the best, or what was the best road, or something like that. This would also be a reoccurring feature. Now, as you can imagine, with all this high-speed thrashing around, often the car companies would be less than pleased in the state that Top Gear would return the vehicles in. But despite this, Top Gear would actually have a generally positive relationship with the car manufacturers, and they were in fact never refused a car until the Rover City Rover. Now, most shows that review products, if they get refused, they might just move on and leave it there. Not Top Gear. So James May had a hidden camera and did a secret car test. Absolutely brilliant.
Anyway, time for an ambitious finale. Will the salesman rumble our Top Gear comparison test as we bring on the Fiat Panda?
And so I had to drive and get up alongside the City Rover, so James could go, oh look, it's the new Fiat Panda, the latest, this is the opposition to this car. And I just remember James going, don't look at me because I'll start laughing.
This rebellious spirit proved to be another reason why people loved the show. Series 5 picked up right where the previous series left off. They drove American muscle cars. James May and Richard Hammond played caravan conkers. For the cheap car challenge, they had to buy a Porsche for under £1,500, which was absolutely hilarious, as they would break down throughout the challenge, launching the long-standing tradition of if a man's down, leave him behind.
probably should go back and look for him. That would be the caring thing to do, but he wouldn't do it for me.
In this series, they also raced to Verbier in Switzerland, Jeremy driving the Ferrari 612 Scaglietti against Richard and James using a plane and then Swiss rail. This time, the race was actually genuinely close, as Jeremy overtook Richard and James just before the finishing line.
I remember being on the tube listening to two guys, and that's when I knew the show was big. I got on the Central line, as I always did, across to White City where the office was. And I remember two guys going, "Did you watch that last night on a Monday morning?" And they were going, "Oh, that Verbier thing, that was unbelievable." I'm like, "Oh, okay, we're in the public consciousness now."
This series also saw a great segment where Jeremy Clarkson, aided by professional racing driver Sabine Smith, tried to go round the longest, scariest racetrack in the world, a 13-mile track with 147 corners that had claimed over 200 lives. This track was the Nürburgring, and Jeremy Clarkson attempted to go round it in under 10 minutes in a diesel Jaguar. Diesels are slow, apparently. I don't drive, so I didn't really know that. Anyway, they really got across the difficulty of this feat, climaxing in Jeremy just making it under the 10-minute mark before Sabine Smith said she could beat that time in a van, and then proceeded in the Jaguar to go round in 9 minutes and 12 seconds, way under Clarkson's time. However, not everything went Top Gear's way, as in 2004 they tried to move the studio to Oxfordshire so Richard Hammond and Jeremy Clarkson could have a shorter commute from where they lived. This sparked much anger from the Oxfordshire locals. Top Gear got permission to build a studio there, but they didn't have permission to film car tests and stunts, so ultimately they had to stay at Dunsfold. And thank goodness for that, James doesn't need any more help getting lost. This series also saw a recurring segment where each episode would feature James May talking about a historically significant car that might have seen better days, and the audience had the chance to vote for one of them to be restored in a later series. It was sort of like a hipster's Pimp My Ride. The winner was a Mini that belonged to rally driving legend Paddy Hopkirk, which turned out not to have actually belonged to him, so the restoration was scrapped and all those audience votes proved to be a waste of time and money. Never mind. Series 5 also saw them gain criticism from environmental groups due to Jeremy using a 4x4 to scale the mountain Ben Tongue in Scotland. The Mountaineering Council of Scotland accused the show of causing lasting damage to the area. I mean, it's Scotland, how worse can you actually make it? Now, this wasn't the first complaint that Top Gear received from environmentalists. They also received a lot of stick from the amount of gas-guzzling cars that they'd featured. But would this backlash hold the show back? Fuck no. Fuck no.
Now, we've been told that in this new series, we've got to feature more green cars. So, here's one. It's really the greenest car we could find, really, and hopefully it will keep the environmentals happy, because coming up now is what we've got in this series for normal people.
Unlike most geezers today, Top Gear never bowed to public pressure to apologise whenever they upset anyone, which proved to be a lot.
I think the problem I have as a kind of frustrated, bitter, politically correct, middle-aged liberal is I can't work out which one of the three Top Gear presenters to despise the most.
Following on from a point I made earlier about the Rover review, Top Gear very much cast themselves as rebels. They were like the disruptive school kid who'd always get in trouble but would always get away with it because they made everyone else in the room laugh. For better or worse, this defiance helped Top Gear win over more adoring fans, as they wouldn't let anyone tell them what to do, specifically hairstylists.
I mean, it's a weekly occurrence that somebody will complain, Top Gear was on last night, and it's just, you sit back and wait for the complaints. But if you start to pay attention to everybody's concerns, you end up with something bland and boring. So you sort of have to ignore everybody in order to do the show how we want to do it.
The first episode of Series 6 seemed to be a particular fuck you to environmentalists.
We're kind of with Greenpeace on this. We think it's ridiculous that town and city centres are clogged up with enormous gas-guzzling vehicles that only have one person on board. So we thought that we'd stage a protest of our own. And here it is. This is Hammersmith Bus Depot at rush hour, and look, we've handcuffed ourselves to a bus. Buses kill 48 badgers a week.
Buses burn planets.
CFCs coming out of the back of that bus are enough to fill the Pacific Ocean every 3 weeks.
You're making this stuff up.
That's what you do to get in the papers. You just make up statistics, they get printed, and you sound really good.
Right.
Public pressure? What pressure? They simply didn't give a fuck.
A Range Rover!
When do we want it? As soon as we can arrange easy finance.
Well, as soon as the supercharger comes out.
See, the bus driver was so angry he had to come up and ask for an autograph.
Yeah, and then look, they put a bus in front of us so we couldn't be seen by all the passengers, but we just chained ourselves to that one then.
That same episode saw Richard Hammond and James May play a game of car football. This here might show the clearest difference in the step up in quality between old Top Gear and new Top Gear, as they previously attempted something similar, and in comparison it just looks shit in every way. The new Top Gear was on a completely different level of class, and the old Top Gear, or in fact any motoring show, just looked outdated in comparison. The actual game of car football itself was actually pretty decent, as they had the cars driven by ex-professional racing drivers, one of which was the actual Stig himself, Ben Collins. Yeah. Ben would also drive the camera car when he wasn't playing the Stig. On a side note, I always wondered how Top Gear got away with damaging so many cars on a BBC budget. Now it turns out car companies would lend them pre-production cars, so they could in fact get away with damaging them. In fact, the car football idea was suggested to them by someone at Toyota. Yeah, interesting. Top Gear also used salvage cars from scrapyards and cars that had failed their MOTs. Over the course of the show, they destroyed 166 vehicles. I'm surprised it's that low. This series was pure class. They did another cheap car challenge, which was great. Jeremy tried to outdrive trained sniper shooters. All 3 presenters did a road test with their old Mars. James recreated the Top Gear theme with engine car noises, which surprisingly worked. Jeremy drove a Rolls Royce into a swimming pool. They had a vote for the best driving song, which inspired James May to find inventive ways to bash Meatloaf.
We have been told that if you vote on the internet for Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell, your internet service provider will change your domain name to Loser.
Sabine Smith tried to take a van around the Nürburgring in under 10 minutes. And for their epic race, they went from London to Oslo. Jeremy in a Mercedes-Benz SLR against May and Hammond taking a plane, ferry and then a speedboat. This was actually neck and neck until May and Hammond transferred over to a speedboat to get to the finishing line, and they ended up breaking 2 speedboats and finished nowhere near the finishing line. Still a great challenge. Top to bottom, Series 6 was box office, and this reflected in the ratings, as the series average rose from the previous series, this time reaching 4.21 million. Top Gear would even win an award, an Emmy no less. It was an international Emmy for non-scripted entertainment. Not the most prestigious award, I don't think it got televised, but nonetheless, it beat something called FC Zulu. Go on lads. James May also found solo success on his show James May's Top Toys. By this point, all three presenters were becoming household names in their own right, who were bankable stars you could give their own individual projects to or be the face of a brand. The next series, Series 7, average viewership would rise again, this time to 4.61 million. And you can certainly see why. This series was unbelievable. They did a road trip across France in their favourite supercars, in the process converting Paris into one big traffic jam. The cheap car challenge saw them buy Italian sports cars for under 10,000. Richard and James try out some life-size remote control cars before Jeremy introduced a life-size flying remote control car. James raced a mountain biker, Richard raced a dog, and Jeremy in real life tried to set a lap time faster than he could set in a video game, with the conditions being the same. And for this series' epic race, fuck me, this was good. Jeremy Clarkson was behind the wheel of the fastest road car in the world, the Bugatti Veyron, and in the process seemed to form some kind of deep relationship to it. He's in awe of it so much, he just stops short of actually fucking it.
You've no idea, mate. It's phenomenal. It goes like a...
Oh, Jesus, you two, get a garage. The race runs from Alba in northern Italy to London, as Clarkson is in the Bugatti while Richard and James are in a plane that James is flying. And yeah, it's just so fucking good, as Richard grew more and more irate throughout the journey, as first Richard found out the state of the plane.
Hang on a second, is that it?
Well, it's a Cessna 182.
James, it's pathetic. It looks like something a builder would leave behind.
It's not, honestly, it's a good kite, this.
Kite?
Yeah.
Then he gets irritated at James's pre-flight checks.
These are drain points. You use this special cup.
Good. Oh, look, it's
clear.
clear.
You take a sample out, and then you make sure there's no water in it, which you would see as a separate layer. See? Clear.
Good. Go.
But
In the sky.
But there are 5 of these on each side and 2 under the engine.
Then even more irritated at the fact James had to reroute them because they couldn't go over mountains.
James, why can I see the bed?
Because we couldn't go over the mountains, mate. I didn't tell you this. We had to route down towards Nice and go along the coast a bit, and then we'll head up
I'm
towards
sorry,
home.
we, the ones in the aeroplane in this race, can't go over the mountains.
No, mate. Sorry.
So, Jeremy's car can go higher than your aeroplane, as well as faster.
Then he moans about the in-flight food. Then they had to stop and refuel. And then James revealed that he wasn't actually qualified to fly at night, so they had to stop and get the train.
James has just told me that he hasn't done the test that allows him to drive the plane at night. So we're going to have to land, and I quote, somewhere, maybe Lille.
It was pretty much like a real-life planes, trains and automobiles. I can't tell you how many times I've watched this over the years, and not just because I frequently destroy my viewing history. Absolutely brilliant.
Surely not.
That's horrible.
You unbearable man! I can't stand it.
The series would end with modern Top Gear's first special, the Top Gear Winter Olympics. This was unreal. It really showed the ambition and the scale of the show. And I didn't think anything could beat car football, but then I saw car ice hockey. And this time, Clarkson was the referee. Definitely go and watch this. Absolutely brilliant.
Go on, James! Go on, man! You've got it! Oh!
Yes, my team were being trounced. And when we finally did score, guess who was otherwise engaged?
Oh, bloody hell.
Yes.
Oh, you got a beer? That's now 5, 2, 3. What is it?
Which side are you on?
I am totally impartial. I'm giving you every possible opportunity.
Can't believe I got sin bin. For what?
Go on ITV, you go in the sin bin. It's that simple.
The show climaxed in a mini ski jump. The whole special, top to bottom, was just fantastic, and audiences loved it as well, getting 5.22 million viewers and praised in the press. Well, I say praised in the press, I found one good review of it, but that still counts. Factually, it was praised in the press. Top Gear was still, and always remained at its core, a motoring show. However, anything aimed at a niche audience, no matter how successful, does have a ceiling. To break through that ceiling and cross over to a larger audience, you'll have to have a broader appeal. As a result, your focus will naturally drift away from that niche subject matter. Regardless of whether this was a conscious decision or it just happened naturally, over time Top Gear became less and less a car show, but instead an entertainment show that featured cars. And this change was the cause of criticism from some of the show's initial audience. However, I wasn't complaining. To me, the show just got better and better, as the show got more ambitious and more ridiculous, in the best possible way. They also stopped focusing on affordable cars and would soon barely feature them at all, which drew even more criticism. But again, I wasn't complaining. There was another motoring show for a reasonable car discussion. Series 8 took the insanity to another level. The three presenters converted the people carrier, a Renault Espace, into a convertible, and then went through a series of tests, like going through an animal enclosure, culminating in them setting fire to a car wash.
It's on fire. It's on fire. Just run.
They also presented on BBC Southern Counties Radio, which descended into all kinds of anarchy.
53 for 3, is that good? I don't understand.
They've scored 253 runs and they've lost 3 wickets, sir. It is cricket. It's a game that's been played in this country for about 300 years.
What, the same
why
game?
don't you get...
Jeremy tried his hand at interior car designing, which James and Richard then test drove. F1 legends Jackie Stewart tried to teach James how to knock 20 seconds off his lap time. We had another game of car football. Give it a few years, FIFA or UEFA will find a way to give this a try. The lads had to become men with then, which involved a task where they had to transport an asylum seeker. Needless to say, Ofcom received loads of complaints about this. They also had to use their vans to transport the Who's equipment. Luckily, not any hard drives were involved. They set an indoor speed record, and there was a great race where Hammond, Clarkson and May had to build a kit car before the Stig could drive a kit car from the Caterham factory in Surrey to the Knockhill racing track in Scotland.
Have I got to take it out again?
Yeah, let's think about it.
In addition to all of this, we had 2 of my favourite challenges ever. The Amphibious Car Challenge, where all 3 presenters had to each convert a car to work on land and in the water. This resulted in one of them sinking, one of them tipping over, and the other one not being able to fully drive up the finishing line. And there was the caravan holiday, and fuck me, this was quality. Caravans have been and would always remain the ire of Top Gear, so you can imagine the frustration that all 3 presenters must have felt when they had to go on a caravan holiday.
Oh! What the hell? Slowly! Slowly!
It's not broken, it's just knocked over.
Oh, God.
If you need to show someone who's never watched a show before an episode of Top Gear to get them into it, show them this one. It's a great example of the show appealing to non-petrol heads. This was just British comedy at its best, resulting in the geezers accidentally setting the caravan alight, and in the process setting light to part of the campsite. Well, I say accidentally, of course this was faked.
We thought, right, we've had a funny film, they go caravanning, but this has got to end with a full stop. So we sort of arranged a fire in the caravan, you know.
Right.
And then, like, a fireman who was there spoke to a newspaper and went, yeah, they called us in advance. And so then one of the papers did, like, fakery and this kind of stuff. Yes, of course we made it up. It's a 30-minute film and it needs a full stop. And it's not Palestine versus Israel. It's a caravan weekend. You know, if you frig a road test, something that people are going to listen to your verdict and buy a car from, then, yeah, you deserve to be shot.
Over the years, Top Gear would fabricate segments in this fashion, and the BBC would constantly field questions and criticism on segments being faked. I mean, this was factual entertainment after all. However, stunts like this were so over the top that the show didn't really attempt to present this as real. And if they were to actually film some of the stuff they did on here for real, they would be classed as international terrorists.
The vast majority of everything is not planned. As you go on 20 years down the road and people have an expectation, you might massage the odd thing or try and engineer or put yourself, you know, in a position where these things happen. But it's in the minority.
Now at least Top Gear fans know how wrestling fans feel when they constantly have to hear all the time, "Oh, did you know it's fake?" Well, yes, because not all the wrestlers are dead. Just most of them. Seeing how successful the show was becoming, Clarkson and Willman made the smart move to set up the private company Better 6, which controlled the programme's international sales. Clarkson would own 30% of the company, Willman would own 20% of the company, and BBC Worldwide would own the other 50%. This proved to be a genius move on the part of Clarkson and Willman. This series would see Top Gear continue to improve on itself, getting a new reasonably priced car, which inspired them to do an invitational star in a reasonably priced car segment, which was absolutely fantastic. Basically, they just put out an open call to whatever celebrities wanted to turn up, and madness ensued. It was fantastic. For this series, Top Gear also got a new and improved opening title sequence, a new, much bigger studio, and a new presenter, the Top Gear dog. When not on the show, this was Richard Hammond's dog, called TG, which is fortunate she got the job, otherwise she'd look a bit silly with that name. When on the show, she was referred to as the Top Gear dog, and didn't really get to present many segments. She would only feature in Series 8 and 2 episodes of Series 9, and then retired from TV after that. Probably couldn't afford her fee. But she was a good addition to the show, and it's nice to see the team answering the critics about the lack of female representation. There you go, she's a female. What are you moaning about? The idea for the Top Gear dog was James May's, who suggested it in a meeting down the pub. Now, with the three presenters, Clarkson was definitely the most invested in the show. This was his baby. He would come up with a majority of the ideas. However, Hammond and May still did contribute ideas, and they would come into the office during the off-seasons to film VTs, as they would often be at the BBC offices for other projects that they would do for the channel outside of Top Gear. It was on one of these fateful days that Richard Hammond came into the office and said he wanted to drive really, really fast. Well, your wish is about to come true. For a bit. Originally in Series 9, James May was set to drive the Vampire Dragster, a jet-propelled drag racing car that held the British land speed record. Richard Hammond was meant to be driving the fastest road legal car in the world, the aforementioned Bugatti Veyron, but then the dates for the availability of the Vampire changed, so Richard and James arranged a swap. So on the 20th of September 2006, at the former RAF Elvington airfield near York, Richard Hammond got behind the wheel of the vampire dragster. And it went fine. They got some good footage. Richard achieved his goal of driving really fast. Looks like it would be a good segment. All's well that ends well.
To stop it from high speed, had to pull the parachute cord. To stop the parachute came out and stopped it.
But it's TV, you don't get all your footage the first time round, so Richard Hammond went behind the wheel and did another run in the dragster. And then another one. And then another one. Still, all went fine.
I turned up on the day, did numerous runs in the thing. It was pretty basic and crude. Really quite fast, especially when you did the afterburner.
After 6 runs in the dragster, they still needed more footage.
The director came over and said, Rich, I've got permission for one last run. Oh, brilliant, right. We were happy with how it's gone, but let's get one more bag of shots.
So Richard Hammond got behind the wheel for a 7th time, what was meant to be the final run of the day. But I suppose it did prove to be the final run of the day. It'd be a bit of a liberty to ask Richard for another take after this. So once again, Richard got up to a really fast speed. He was just shy of 320 miles an hour. And then his front tyre gave out.
I was aware something had happened. All I recall is a sense of, oh no. Foot going towards a brake and realised I was doing I didn't know, but I was doing 300, just shy of 320 miles an hour. So brakes not really anything. What had happened is the front tyre had delaminated and blown. The car had skewed right and was going off the road, but it was still doing 290 miles an hour as it started to roll. I'd pulled the lever for the parachute. It was never going to stop it. So then it went over. And I just thought, well, I'm going to die now.